Acts 27. Um, Paul's not a sailor, but he's a pretty smart guy, and he advised Julius, I'm making an assumption here that the responsibility for delivering Paul to Rome had not shifted from Julius to someone else, but Paul had advised Julius that he could foresee great loss, maybe even loss of life, if they uh, set out to sea in this winter season. But Julius listened, and I don't blame Julius for this. He listened to the ship's captain, and that he said, "We can do this, let's go." Well, okay. Verse 13. When a gentle south wind began to blow, they saw their opportunity. So they weighed anchor and sailed along the shore of Crete. Well, they're not out to sea yet. They're along the shoreline there. Verse 14. Before very long, a wind of hurricane force called the northeaster swept down from the island. You ever had that happen? Well, it seems like every indicator is it's all good. Now's the time. This is your opportunity. Go. But before very long, a storm. This is not just heavy wind. This is like a wind of hurricane force. Well, verse 15, the ship was caught by the storm and could not head into the wind. So we gave way to it and were driven along. As we passed to the lee of a small island called Cauda, we were hardly able to make the lifeboat secure. So the men hoisted it aboard. Then they passed ropes under the ship itself to hold it together. For those of us that are landlubbers, don't have experience sailing in a wooden ship, a first century wooden ship. Basically, what Paul or Luke is recording here is that they were taking drastic measures here. And then they passed ropes under the ship itself to hold it together. Because they were afraid they would run aground on the sandbars of Syrtis, they lowered the ship, the sea anchor, which the sea anchor was not the one that was supposed to drag the bottom and stop. It was just to slow the ship down. And they let the ship be driven along. I mean, it was beyond their control, so they did the best thing they could, and that was just give in to the wind. Gosh, there's so much that could be said in terms of the metaphor in that for life, but I'll leave that to your own, meditation. Verse 18. We took such a violent battering from the storm that the next day they began to throw the cargo overboard. Don't miss that what they were doing is they were throwing away other people's stuff, and it meant basically, as far as I can see, one of the things that it meant was you're not going to make any profit on this voyage. The second thing is, there's a real strong possibility they would have been held responsible to reimburse the people whose cargo they were supposed to be transporting. Well, I don't know. On the third day, they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. Now that is huge, because perhaps the largest investment that the ship owner could have made was in the ship's tackle. Without the ship's tackle, it was just a boat. Verse 20. When neither sun nor stars appeared for many days and the storm continued raging, we finally gave up all hope of being saved. That Wow. When you give up hope of being saved, basically what that amounts to is, we're going to die. Get used to it. Boy, the metaphor for life. Have you ever been in a spot where you just gave up hope? It's like, I don't know. I can't imagine anything. I have no hope of being saved. Well, verse 21. After they had gone a long time without food, Paul stood up before them and said, "Men, you should have taken my advice and not to sail from Crete." It's kind of like Paul going, "I told you so. Then you would have spared yourselves this damage and loss." Well, if I was a sailor and I heard Paul say this, I would have said, "Right, Paul, okay. Then he said, "But now I urge you to keep up your courage, because not one of you will be lost, only the ship will be destroyed." All right, now I'm raising my eyebrows if I'm a sailor. Verse 23, "Last night, an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I serve stood beside me and said, 'Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand trial before Caesar, and God has graciously given you the lives of all who sail with you. So keep up your courage, men, for I have faith in God that it will happen just as he told me. Nevertheless, we must run aground on some island.'" The good news was nobody's going to die. The bad news is this is not going to be a pleasure cruise from here on. We'll lose the ship, but we'll not lose lives. Okay. Now, a couple of things that are worth thinking about here. In century 1, these Roman and Alexandrian sailors would have been quite superstitious, okay? They believed, if as a typical Roman and an Alexandrian would have, that was in Egypt, but it was Greco-Roman culture. They would have believed in many gods. So it wouldn't have been very far outside reason for these Romans and Egyptians to believe that this vision from Paul and his prophecy was valid, because they had their own religious beliefs involved men and women who could foretell the future. And they would have, I think they would have, at least, even if it was with reservations, they would have figured that Paul was one of those seers. And they might have taken some courage and taken some heart. I think they did, from what Paul said. Okay. I got to go back to the metaphor. I can't help it. Well, I can't help it, but I'm not going to. Have you ever had a season in your life where it felt like there was no hope that anything good was going to come of this, that you were stuck, it was going to be all bad all the time, you're doomed? Maybe not. Kind of, I have a few times. And I don't believe this is punishment from God. What I think is that's kind of how life rolls. But for a believer, we have, even when it doesn't feel like it or seem like it very much, we have the promise of God that he doesn't look the other way. He doesn't, even for a moment, step away. The writer of Hebrews emphasized an Old Testament quotation that said, "I will never leave you, I will never forsake you." So we've got that. My problem is, it feels like he isn't watching. He isn't here. He's out there somewhere else. Either he's occupied with other things. My little petty life-ending issue is not his concern, or he's just saying, hey, figure it out. I don't think that's true, but it feels like it. I had lunch with a friend who has been such an encourager to me, and we began talking about trust and faith and grace, and he shared with me in his own journey of grace and trust that Psalm 91 had been a real help to him. And he recommended that I read it, because my quiet time is in the morning. He said, read it in your quiet time and personalize it. I have been doing that, and I'm just going to say it's very powerful. I even recommend it to you. If you are in a season where things are, maybe you don't feel hopeless, but boy, this is a tough season. Psalm 91, I think, could be a terrific help. It has been for me. Here's the deal, though. When Paul said, no loss of life, but we're going to run aground on some island, meaning we're not getting to Rome, okay, yet. We're going to run aground on some island. I don't even know which island. God didn't tell me that. But we are going to run aground. And so, okay, let's. So one of the things I'm trying to learn is for me, what Paul said, we must run aground on some island, is almost as if he's saying, I can't tell you I don't know any more than that, but what I do know, let's focus on that. I get wrapped around the axle of what might happen out there, and I fear all that, right? I dread these things. There's really not much reason for it, and here's why. Almost all of that never happens. Okay. You can do what you will. So in verse 27, on the 14th night, you think about 2 weeks of non-stop hurricane winds, hearing the boat creak and crackle and wondering if it's going to stay together. This is not like, oh, this is kind of bumpy. No. This is like 14 days of, at any moment, we could all drown. On the 14th night, we were still being driven across the Adriatic Sea when about midnight, the sailors sensed they were approaching land. How did they sense it? Well, sailors have a sense, but they were also taking sounds, meaning they were measuring the depth with. And it's an ancient and what do I want to call it? A crude tool, but they could sense. They could take readings. So many metaphors, but I've already wasted my time and your time on that, and my time's up. So I'm going to have to come back to this narrative when we meet next time on Soul Care with Stevie Boy.